Greetings, fellow detectives. Wizard Kitten 774 here, bringing you my review for the second game in the Nancy Drew series, Nancy Drew Stay Tuned for Danger. As usual, I will be grading the game on 5 different grading categories. We have plot, characters, setting and design, entertainment and gameplay value, and music and vibe. Each of those categories is graded on a scale of 1 to 10 for a final score out of 50 and then a final letter grade associated with that score. So, let's get started talking about the plot of Stay Tuned for Danger. Overall, I think it's a really solid plot, which is impressive since it's only the second Nancy Drew game. It really did not take long for them to figure out the formula for a really good plot. So basically, Nancy is called to New York City to help soap opera star Rick Arlen because he's been getting death threats, and his co-star Maddie Jensen is worried about him. Rick has apparently been brushing off these threats, but Maddie thinks there is something more serious going on with them. So Nancy is invited to New York City. She stays in Aunt Eloise's apartment where Maddie is currently living because Aunt Eloise manages to have a house in Florida and a house in New York City because she clearly knows how to manage her money, but that's beside the point. So, the plot, I think, is really pretty unique. It's the only time that Nancy is really called into a mystery because of mysterious death threats. So, the uniqueness of the plot is a definite plus. It's also organized really well. So, when we come to the studio for the first time, we kind of meet Rick, we see some of these threats laying around, we start to learn more about them, and I think everything just comes together in a really cool way. There aren't really any major plot holes. The only weird thing about the plot is that it's kind of fragmented almost. There's a few characters that are kind of just there, and that's more in the characters category. It does impact the plot a little bit because you kind of feel like there should be more to the plot with those extra characters there. You feel like there should be a little bit more going on. The plot that is there is solid, but it does feel like there is a little bit missing. Also, in addition to the plot, the ending of this game is absolutely incredible. It's terrifying, and it's really exciting. It really gives you an adrenaline rush, and for such an early game, that's a really big plus. So, despite the fact that it feels like it's missing a few things, I think the plot overall is very solid, and I give Stay Tuned for Danger an 8 out of 10 on plot. Next, we'll move on to characters. So this game actually has a really large cast of characters, and as I mentioned before, a couple of them don't really do too much. So we have Maddie Jensen, the soap opera star who called us in to help Rick Arlen, who is the second character, the soap opera star who has been receiving death threats. There's also Lillian Weiss, the director of Light of Our Love, the show that Rick and Maddie star in. There's Millie Strathoorn, who is the owner of the studio as well as the prop master. She works in the prop room. And then there's Ralph Guardino, who is the security guard. And then there's Dwayne Powers, who is Maddie's agent and used to be Rick's agent. So that's a cast of 6 characters, which is almost unheard of in a Nancy Drew game. But again, only I'd say 3 of the characters are actually spoken to regularly. And the character conversations are good. It's a vast improvement over the first game. There's a lot more going on. You get a little bit more of a backstory for the characters right off the bat. The kind of romance, the love triangle going on between Rick and Maddie and Lillian. You learn more about Millie and how she writes scripts in the background, and you learn about how Dwayne was Rick's agent, and then they had kind of a falling out, but he's still Maddie's agent, and now he's in kind of financial straits. So the characters overall are actually really interesting. The only problem I have is that there are those 2 extra characters, kind of Ralph and Millie, that aren't really that important to the game. It's like Millie's only there to give us cryptic riddles so that we can get into the prop room, and Ralph is only there to check us into the studio as a security guard. And we don't really talk to them much. They're kind of miscellaneous characters, and it does detract from the game a little bit when you have those characters that aren't really adding anything to the game. I do still like them. I think character interaction could have gone more in depth, and that's probably the biggest problem. So, but again, still pretty good character. So I would give Stay Tuned for Danger an 8 out of 10 for characters. Moving on to setting and design. So this takes into consideration kind of the graphics and the setting of the game and how well that's incorporated into the game, as well as the character graphics. Now, the background graphics of this game are pretty sweet. The set design is really cool on Light of Our Love. Aunt Eloise's apartment where Maddie is staying is really cool. Dwayne's office is well done. So all of the setting is really nice, and you do get a feeling of being in New York City without being completely overwhelmed by the fact that you are in New York City. It's more of a subtle interaction, which I like. The problem I have with the setting and design in this game is that first of all, the characters are very robotic. They look like plastic mannequins, and this is a very early game, so it's understandable in the graphics terms, but they look like robots. They look like Barbie dolls that were programmed to move. They have weird head movements. Their arms move a little weirdly. The lighting is very strange, and it is hard to kind of get over that when they do look so goofy. Also, the placement of the characters' heads photoshopped onto pictures of real people is a little jarring and kind of takes you out of the reality of the game. And it's like, oh yeah, I can definitely tell that this is just a game because these characters are obviously not photoshopped very well onto these pictures of real people. So it's a little strange. I think I have to take some points off of setting and design for those distracting design elements. The background graphics are definitely a plus, but I think the character design detracts from it a little bit. So overall, I have to give setting and design a 6 out of 10 for Stay Tuned for Danger. Moving on to entertainment and gameplay value. This is a fun game. It does go a little fast if you've played it before, and that kind of is a bit of a problem for me. I do like the games to last a little bit longer. And also, it's an early game, so navigation is a little clunky, which can detract from the gameplay because you're constantly trying to find hotspots so you can figure out where to move, which gets distracting. Even having played the game multiple times, it's still a little difficult to figure out where to click so that I can go in the direction that I want. And that does detract from the gameplay value. Another problem that I have with the overall flow of the gameplay is that there are certain sequences where you have to have certain objects in order to continue. Otherwise, you will be stuck in a continuous loop of second chances and you won't be able to progress because you can't go back at all. And that's a major problem. Like, if you don't have the pliers before you go into the bomb room, you will not be able to defuse that bomb, and you also won't be able to stop entering the room. If you've done it on accident before, you can't back away from the room once the door has creaked open. And that is a problem, because then you can't continue with the game. You have to go restart a certain section and go back. So the game is fun, but it does have a few of those flaws that kind of detract from the gameplay. I think if it was a little less clunky, if it was designed more that you could make a few mistakes and not just be stuck in a continuous loop, I think I would give it a higher score here. But overall, I have to give Stay Tuned for Danger a 6 out of 10 for entertainment and gameplay value. And finally, we have the category of music and vibe. So I think Stay Tuned for Danger really excels in this area. This is definitely its strongest area for me. The music is really good. It's got some really great kind of waiting room music in the lobby of Worldwide Broadcasting Studios. It's got some really good snooping music. All of it kind of has this jazz element to it almost that really does make you feel like you're in New York City, kind of exploring sets and in the world of New York City film, and almost like a Broadway type feel too, since most of the actors have been in theater. So the music does a really good job of setting the scene. And the overall vibe of the game is pretty impressive as well, given that it's an earlier game. You do still feel creeped out by the fact that Rick Arlen is receiving these death threats. A lot of them are very creepy, and I like how they scattered them throughout multiple parts of the game so that you are really getting involved in those death threats and seeing how much they are escalating. and how Rick is actually starting to become in some danger. And the vibe gets really, really good towards the end of the game when we have the creepiest culprit sequence probably in the entire game. There's only one other that I think that could compare for the ending to Stay Tuned for Danger. The ending is absolutely incredible. The vibe of the ending is what makes it so fantastic because it's terrifying. The culprit has really gone off the deep end. So it's almost difficult to, well, it is difficult to reason with him. You can't. So it's just super interesting. The vibe is wonderful. The music is wonderful. So I give Stay Tuned for Danger a 10 out of 10 for music and vibe. So if we add up all of our scores, we have an 8 for plot, 8 for characters, 6 for setting and design, 6 for entertainment and gameplay value, and 10 for music and vibe, for a total score of 38 and a final grade of a C+. Now, this game isn't in my top 10. I do still think it's a really good game, though. It's one of the very early games, so it's a really good orientation to the series. This is actually the last game I played when I had gotten up to the point where I had played all of the new games and I had to start waiting for games. This was the last one I played, and playing it just really helped make sense of the rest of the Nancy Drew series. It's an incredible introduction to the series, and it really orients you to the world of Nancy Drew. So for that reason alone, I think I definitely would recommend playing this game. It is harder to find now since it has been discontinued, but if you have the option to play it, I would definitely give it a go, despite the fact that it has some clunky gameplay and the characters look a little funny and they might not be as fleshed out as they could be. It's still a really great game and a really great beginning to the series, if you don't count Secrets Can Kill. So that is my review for Nancy Drew Stay Tuned for Danger. Thanks for listening, fellow detectives.